Kihyun Kim's world was one of silent, glacial precision. The 44th floor of the Nexus Core Tower was his kingdom of chrome and code, a realm where emotions were inefficient algorithms to be debugged and deleted. His morning began as all mornings did at 5:17 a.m. The 17 minutes past the hour was a quiet rebellion against round numbers, a subtle reminder that his system was his own. By 8 a.m. he was at his desk, a monolithic piece of black walnut, reviewing projections for the 10 a.m. meeting with the Vanguard Investors Group. This meeting was the keystone to the next quarter's expansion. It required an atmosphere of unimpeachable control. Across the glass partition, Amara Jones was the living, breathing engine of that control. At 8:02 a.m., she placed a fresh carafe of perfectly braised single-origin coffee on his desk, the file for the Vanguard meeting precisely angled to the right. Not a word was exchanged. None were needed. In 3 years as his logistics coordinator, a title that understated her role as the central nervous system of his executive life, they had developed a symbiosis of silence and action. But today, a fissure had already appeared in her impeccable facade. At 7:30 a.m., a panicked call from Little Sprouts Haven had informed her of a sudden pipe burst and an immediate closure. All her carefully orchestrated backup plans, her best friend, her retired neighbor, had fallen through in a domino effect of bad timing. With a heart pounding against her ribs, she had done the unthinkable. She'd bundled a sleepy, confused Zoe into her best corduroy pinafore, packed a stealthy backpack of quiet toys and snacks, and taken the executive elevator to the 44th floor, guiding her daughter to the small, secluded lounge adjacent to the main conference room. "You have to be a mouse, my love," Amara had whispered, kneeling to smooth Zoe's curls. "A very, very quiet mouse. Mama has a very important meeting to help set up. You stay here with Bunny and your blocks, okay?" Zoe, wide-eyed at the unfamiliar landscape of minimalist gray sofas and abstract art, had nodded solemnly. For 90 minutes the system held. Amara flitted between her desk, the conference room ensuring every holographic display was flawless, and the lounge for furtive check-ins. Zoe was enchanted by the blinking lights of the city far below, building silent towers with her blocks. The mouse was playing her part. At 9:55 a.m. the atmosphere shifted. The air itself seemed to stiffen. Kihyun emerged from his office, a study in austere power in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light. His gaze was already fixed on the horizon of the coming negotiation, his mind a vault of data points and strategic replies. He took his habitual path, cutting through the lounge for a final moment of solitude before performance. Zoe, from her nest on the rug, looked up. This man was not a stranger. He was in the photos on Mama's desk at home, the serious-faced man Mama talked to on the computer screen sometimes. A figure of immense, familiar importance in her mother's world. As he passed, a scent of sandalwood and crisp cotton reached her. Without a thought, driven by a child's instinctual pull toward a cornerstone of her universe, she pushed herself up and waddled forward. Her small arms wrapped around the fine dark wool covering his leg, anchoring herself. The world stopped. Kihyun froze mid-stride. A foreign object, warm, soft and clinging, had attached itself to him. He looked down and 2 enormous liquid brown eyes stared up into his. His breath hitched, locked in his chest. His entire body went rigid, a statue of pure shock. He had not been touched without his explicit consent in years, and never by something so small. Amara, who had just finished aligning the last chair in the conference room, turned and felt the blood drain from her face. A silent scream echoed in her skull. She moved, a streak of panic, her heels silent on the plush carpet. "Zoe, no, sweetheart, let go." But it was too late. Zoe, sensing the towering attention finally focused on her, patted his leg with one chubby hand and bestowed her sunniest, most confident smile upon the frozen billionaire. The word, clear as a bell, rang out in the hushed space. Dada. The syllable hung in the air, absurd, devastating and terrifyingly loud. At that exact, catastrophic moment, the polished doors of the main entrance hissed open. Liam Thorne, the lead Vanguard investor, walked in with his retinue, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. The formidable Kihyun Kim, petrified, with a small child fastened to his leg like a barnacle, and his flustered assistant trying to pry her off. Thorne's eyebrows skyrocketed. A beat of profound, awkward silence engulfed the room. Kihyun's icy composure, the very bedrock of his professional persona, had just been shattered by a single, innocent word. Amara's heart plunged, not just from professional fear, but from a deep, personal wound torn open. And Zoe, content at having properly greeted the important man, simply rested her cheek against his knee, completing the portrait of a family moment that was, in every possible way, a beautifully timed disaster. The silence in the lounge was a physical entity, thick and strangling. It was broken only by the soft, oblivious hum of the climate control system. Liam Thorne cleared his throat, a sound like gravel crunching under tire. Kihyun remained paralyzed, the warmth of the child's cheek seeping through his tailored trousers. A sensation so alien, so electrically human, it short-circuited his famed analytical mind. Amara's fingers, trembling slightly, finally succeeded in gently disengaging Zoe's arms. She swept her daughter up, anchoring the girl on her hip, a human shield and a lifeline. "Mr. Thorne, gentlemen, welcome," she managed, her voice miraculously steady, a testament to her professionalism under fire. "Please, proceed to the conference room. We are all set for you." Her eyes, wide and dark with a potent cocktail of apology and dread, flicked to Kihyun's face. It was the briefest of glances, but it held a universe of meaning. "I am so sorry. I will explain. Please do not implode." The spell broke. Kihyun gave a minute, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if dislodging water from his ear. He smoothed a hand down his tie, the gesture automatic, a reinstalling of armor. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice thankfully steady, devoid of its usual icy edge but now carrying a strange flat calm. "A minor, scheduling anomaly. Please follow Ms. Jones." He did not look at Amara or the child again. He turned and led the way into the conference room, his back ramrod straight. The investors followed, a few exchanging puzzled, amused glances. Amara, her heart hammering against Zoe's side, took a fortifying breath and followed, assuming her position at the holographic control panel to the side of the room, Zoe still firmly on her hip. There was no other choice. The 90-minute meeting that followed was the most surreal of Kihyun's career. He spoke about algorithmic scalability and market penetration, his words precise and logical, while his peripheral vision was filled with the sight of Amara Jones subtly bouncing a child on her hip as she navigated the presentation slides with her free hand. Zoe, thankfully, was fascinated by the dancing holographic data models, pointing with a tiny silent finger. Amara would gently still her hand, her attention split with a prowess that was, under any other circumstances, breathtaking. Liam Thorne, to his credit, was a professional. He asked sharp, pertinent questions. But his eyes kept drifting to the pair by the wall, a small, curious smile playing on his lips. When the presentation concluded, he stood, shaking Kihyun's hand firmly. "A compelling vision, Kihyun." "As always," Thorne said. His gaze slid meaningfully toward Amara and Zoe, now quietly playing with a stylus on the floor behind the console. "And, a humanizing one. Family changes a man's perspective. Gives depth to his drive. Something to truly build for, eh?" Kihyun offered a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed." After the last investor had filed out, the heavy doors clicking shut, the artificial calm in the room evaporated. The air grew cold and still. Amara stood up, holding a now dozing Zoe against her shoulder. She faced Kihyun, who had not moved from the head of the long, empty table. "Mr. Kim, I can explain," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My office. Now." The words were not loud but they were glacial. He turned and walked out, not waiting to see if she followed. She did, of course, the walk to his office a death march. She settled Zoe on the expansive leather sofa, where the exhausted child immediately curled into a ball, thumb in mouth. Amara then stood before his desk, hands clasped tightly in front of her, a soldier awaiting court-martial. Kihyun stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, watching the ant-like traffic 44 stories below. Minutes ticked by, measured only by the soft, even sound of Zoe's breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was not the angry blast she had steeled herself for. It was calm, analytical, dissecting the problem. That was the Vanguard Group. They control a 20% swing vote in our next funding round. Perception is not a soft metric, Ms. Jones. It is a calculable variable in investor confidence. "I know, sir. I take full responsibility. The daycare had an emergency and all my backups failed. It will never happen again." The words tasted like ash. Never happen again likely meant she would be seeking new employment, where her childcare failures wouldn't jeopardize multimillion-dollar deals. He turned. His expression was unreadable, but the furious tension she'd expected was absent. Instead he looked preoccupied. "The child called me Dada." He stated it as a data point. Amara flushed, a wave of heat and pain crashing over her. Zoe's father passed away before she was 1. She's at the age where she's trying to make sense of family roles. She sees you on my home office screen during our late calls. She must have connected the dots incorrectly. It was a vulnerability she had never intended to expose, the raw truth of her life laid bare between the spreadsheets and performance reviews. Kihyun absorbed this. Orphaned young himself, the concept of father was an abstract, barren landscape. Yet the word from that child's mouth had not felt like an insult. It had felt like a key turning in a long-rusted lock. The narrative is now contaminated, he said, moving to sit behind his desk, steepling his fingers. Thorne believes she is mine. Or that we are involved. To suddenly correct him could be seen as deceptive, or worse, as you using your child for sympathy or leverage. It introduces a variable of drama Nexus Core cannot afford. Amara's spirit sank further. He was viewing her deepest personal tragedy as a corporate PR problem. Therefore, he continued, his eyes meeting hers with crystalline intensity, we will control the narrative. Here is my proposal. 1. I will formally sponsor Zoe's enrollment in the premier, secured daycare facility in the city's financial district. This is a logical extension of our new family-forward corporate branding. 2. You will, on occasion, bring her to official Nexus Core family events, the summer picnic, the holiday gala. I will be present. We will present a united, if ambiguous, front. A picture of stable, benevolent normalcy. He leaned forward slightly. This is not a personal favor, Ms. Jones. It is a strategic recalibration. You maintain your employment and receive a significant benefit for your child. I stabilize the investor perception and align the company with positive familial values. It is a transactional arrangement. Do you understand? Amara stared at him. She heard the cold logic, saw the impeccable business sense. Yet, beneath the glacial surface of his proposal, she also sensed something else. A man who had just been handed a script for a role he never imagined playing, and was, in his own dysfunctional way, trying to ensure no one else got hurt in the process. He was offering security, wrapped in the sterile paper of a business deal. Her arms ached to hold Zoe closer. This offer was a lifeline for her daughter's future, however bizarrely packaged. She swallowed the last of her pride. I understand, Mr. Kim. Transactional. I accept your terms. Good. He gave a single, sharp nod, the deal sealed. The first event is the company picnic in 2 weeks. Ensure she is prepared. As Amara gathered her sleeping daughter and walked out of the office, she felt unmoored. She had just agreed to let her boss pretend to be a paternal figure in her child's life. It felt dangerous, blasphemous, and yet, the look on Zoe's peaceful face, the weight of the security offered, quieted the storm inside her. Behind his desk, Kihyun Kim looked at the empty spot where the child had slept. The ghost of warmth on his leg lingered. He had just engineered a complex solution to a PR problem. So why did the cold, empty silence of his perfect office suddenly feel so much deeper than it had just an hour before? The manicured expanse of Central Park's North Meadow was a jarring contrast to the sleek, controlled environment of the Nexus Core Tower. For Kihyun Kim, it was a sensory assault. The cacophony of laughter, the shrieks of children playing, the smell of charcoal and sun-warmed grass. It was chaos, an inefficient and noisy system. He stood near the Nexus Core branded welcome table, a monolith in a sea of casual summer wear, his dark linen shirt and trousers looking like a corporate uniform amidst the florals and polo shirts. He was here to execute a business plan. The objective, project approachable, familial leadership. The assets, his assistant and her child. The metrics, positive employee interactions, candid photos for the internal newsletter, reinforced investor confidence. Amara arrived 10 minutes after the official start time, a calculated delay to avoid a grand entrance. She carried a large woven bag and held Zoe's hand. The little girl was a burst of sunshine in a yellow dress, her eyes wide as she took in the spectacle of bouncy castles and face-painting stations. Amara had dressed with careful neutrality, a simple navy sundress, professional yet soft. She spotted Kihyun and guided Zoe toward him, her smile polite, rehearsed. Mr. Kim, she greeted, her voice steady. Ms. Jones. He gave a curt nod, his eyes flickering to the child and then away as if she were a bright light. The schedule indicates team volleyball starts in 20 minutes. I am expected to serve first. Of course, Amara said. She knelt beside Zoe. Remember, sweetie? This is Mr. Kim. We're going to enjoy the picnic today. Zoe, however, was operating on a different protocol. The serious man from the office was here in the sunshine. He was tall and to her mind looked like he needed help finding the fun. Without a word, she reached up and slipped her small, slightly sticky hand into his. Kihyun froze. It was a different sensation than the leg cling. This was deliberate, an offer of connection. Her hand was impossibly small and warm within his still one. He stared at their joined hands, his brain momentarily failing to compute the appropriate response. Shake it off? Hold it? He left it limp, a dead fish in her grasp, which Zoe seemed to accept as agreement. She seems to require guidance, he stated flatly to Amara, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of anxiety and fascination. She's just being friendly, Amara said softly, her heart aching at the awkward tableau. You can just walk with her. Oh, he could do that. It was a motor function. He took a stiff step forward, and Zoe matched his pace, swinging their connected hands. They made a slow, bizarre procession toward the main picnic area. Employees waved, their expressions a blend of curiosity and surprise. Kihyun responded with terse nods, his focus entirely on the act of not tripping over the small human attached to him. The awkwardness peaked at the lemonade stand. A friendly intern handed Zoe a cup. She took it, then immediately, solemnly, offered it up to Kihyun. For you, she stated. He looked at the cup, beating with condensation, a stray piece of pulp floating inside. He had a personal barista for a reason. I do not require hydration at this time. Zoe's lower lip trembled just slightly. It was a minuscule movement, but to Amara, who knew every shade of her daughter's face, it was a warning sign. Kihyun, to his own shock, also registered it. A malfunction. The offering of the cup was a social ritual, and he had rejected it, causing potential distress. Distress was counterproductive to the objective of stable normalcy. With the careful precision of a bomb defusal expert, he took the cup. Thank you, he said, the words foreign. He took the smallest sip imaginable. The drink was overly sweet, acidic. Zoe beamed, her world righted, and skipped off to where Amara was laying out a blanket. Kihyun stood holding the cup, watching them. He saw how Amara effortlessly spread the blanket, how she produced wipes and snacks from her bag, a master of logistics in this outdoor domain. He saw the easy way other employees with children gravitated toward her, exchanging smiles. She belonged here in a way he fundamentally did not. The afternoon wore on. Kihyun participated in the volleyball game, they won. His serves were ruthless line drives. He made stiff small talk with senior staff. He was performing the role. Yet, his attention kept being pulled back to the yellow splash of Zoe's dress. He saw her fall near the jungle gym, a clumsy trip over her own feet. He heard the sharp intake of breath before the cry, saw her small hands scrape against the dirt. His body moved before his mind could process the strategic implications. He was across the grass, bypassing Amara, who was already on her way. He knelt, his expensive trousers sinking into the earth. Zoe was wailing, holding up her dirty, slightly bloodied palms. It is a superficial abrasion, he heard himself say, his voice clinical. The risk of infection is low with proper cleansing. Zoe just cried harder, big tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. The data was not helping. He looked at her pained, trusting face, then at her outstretched hands. Protocols failed. Instinct, a ghost of a memory from a childhood he never discussed, flickered. Slowly, hesitantly, he slid his hands under her arms and lifted her from the ground. It was the first hug. It was not graceful. He held her slightly away from his body at first, as one might hold an unfamiliar, fragile artifact. But her small arms immediately encircled his neck, her face buried against his collar, her cries muffling into shaky hiccups. The warmth of her, the weight, the complete, trusting surrender, it was a seismic event in the silent tundra of his being. He could smell her shampoo, a scent of strawberries and cream, and the clean, salty scent of her tears. Carefully, incrementally, he drew her closer, allowing her to settle against his chest. One hand came up, patting her back in an awkward rhythmic motion he'd seen in old films. The cleansing will be necessary, he murmured into her hair, his voice barely audible. But the structural integrity is sound. Amara reached them, her own eyes wet with a complex emotion. She offered a damp cloth. Here, let me. But Kihyun, still holding Zoe, took the cloth himself. With a concentration he usually reserved for reviewing million-dollar contracts, he gently, meticulously wiped the dirt and tiny beads of blood from her palms. Zoe's sobs subsided into sniffles, her head heavy on his shoulder. When he was done, she didn't let go. She simply sighed, a shudder of spent emotion, and clung tighter. He stood, holding her, unsure of the next move. Amara's gaze met his over their daughter's head. In her eyes he saw no pity, no triumph. He saw only a shared, profound shock at the universe's strange turn. He had held a child. He had provided, in his stilted way, comfort. And it hadn't shattered him. It had, impossibly, made the deafening noise of the picnic fade into a distant hum. He carried Zoe back to their blanket, where she eventually drifted into an exhausted sleep, her head in his lap. He sat rigidly at first, then slowly relaxed as the weight of her remained. He didn't participate in the watermelon eating contest or the tug-of-war. He simply sat, one hand resting lightly on the small, sleeping back, keeping guard over this unexpected, living, breathing part of the deal. The sun shifted. The objective of the day had been met, even exceeded. But as he looked down at the sleeping child, Kihyun Kim knew, with a terrifying clarity, that the metrics had just been permanently, irrevocably changed. The Nexus Core Tower at night was a cathedral of shadows and silent, humming potential. The relentless daylight energy was gone, replaced by the soft glow of emergency lighting and the faint cyan pulse of server racks visible through glass walls. It was Kihyun's preferred habitat, a time when the building's logic matched his own internal wiring. But tonight the code felt different. It was littered with glitches, persistent, warm, human-shaped glitches. He sat at his desk, the financial projections for the new Singapore data center blurring before his eyes. Instead of bandwidth allocation graphs, he saw the phantom weight of a child asleep in his lap. Instead of cost per unit analyses, he calculated the exact angle of a sunbeam on a yellow dress, the refractive index of a tear on a dusty cheek. It was intolerable. Inefficient. With a sharp exhale, he pushed back from his desk. He would perform a perimeter check, a ritual that always grounded him in the tangible reality of his empire. He moved through the silent corridors, his footsteps echoing. He passed Amara's workstation, its neatness a testament to her mind. A single, framed photo faced her chair, angled away from the hallway. He had never looked at it. It was an unspoken boundary. Tonight he paused. He already knew what it contained, the smiling face of a man he'd never met, Zoe's father. The source of the word that had started it all. He moved on, his restlessness growing. As he approached the small, secluded lounge, the site of the original disruption, he saw a soft, warm light spilling from within, a stark contrast to the cool hallway tones. He stopped in the doorway. He moved on, his restlessness growing. As he approached the small, secluded lounge, the site of the original disruption, he saw a soft, warm light spilling from within, a stark contrast to the cool hallway tones. He stopped in the doorway. Amara was asleep on the long, gray sofa, one arm tucked under her head, the other dangling toward the floor. She still wore her work blouse and skirt, but her shoes were off, kicked carelessly aside. The tableau was one of profound, unguarded exhaustion. But it was the other figure that arrested him completely. Zoe was asleep on a separate, smaller love seat, a puffy company-branded jacket from the Lost and Found draped over her like a blanket. She was curled around a tablet, its screen dark, and a half-eaten container of yogurt bites sat on the cushion beside her. A late-night client call from Singapore had forced Amara to stay, and clearly, all contingencies had been spent. Kihyun stood frozen, not by shock this time, but by an overwhelming, unfamiliar impulse. The logical action was to wake Amara, inform her the building was not a dormitory, and send them home in a company car. It was the policy. It was the order. He did not move. He watched the steady rise and fall of Amara's shoulders, the slight furrow in her brow even in sleep. He saw the way Zoe's fist was clenched tight around the sleeve of the jacket. They were adrift in his sterile sea, vulnerable. The part of him that was a fortress saw a security risk. The newer, deeply confused part of him saw something to be safeguarded. Quietly he retreated to his office. He returned not with a wake-up call, but with the cashmere throw that draped the back of his reading chair, an item of pure luxury never used. He approached Amara first. With a precision that bordered on reverence, he draped the soft fabric over her. She stirred, mumbling something unintelligible, and burrowed slightly into the warmth, the furrow in her brow smoothing. The action was so fundamentally alien to him, providing comfort, unbidden, unseen, that his hand trembled just for a second as he let go of the blanket. He then turned to Zoe. The corporate jacket was insufficient. He removed his own suit jacket, the fine wool still holding the residual warmth from his body. Gently, he extricated the Lost and Found jacket and replaced it with his own, tucking the lapels around her small form. The jacket swallowed her, a dark blue cocoon. She sighed in her sleep, a sound of pure contentment. Then he did not leave. He sat in the armchair across from them, the one meant for visitors seeking favors. He did not open his tablet. He did not check his phone. He simply sat, a sentinel in the half-light, and watched over them. His mind, for once, was not racing with strategy. It was observing, cataloging details his efficiency-focused brain had previously filtered out. The subtle freckles across Amara's nose, visible without her usual light makeup. The way Zoe's eyelashes cast tiny shadows on her cheeks. The quiet, syncopated rhythm of their breathing, slowly falling into a shared pattern. He felt no urge to control this situation, to optimize it. His role in this silent night watch was simply to ensure they were safe, ensure they were warm, ensure that for these few hours, in this building he had built as a monument to isolation, they were not alone. It was perhaps the first selfless act of his adult life, and it was undertaken with the solemnity of a sacred duty. An hour later, Amara stirred more deeply, her eyes fluttering open. Disorientation gave way to mild panic as she registered the dim lounge, the late hour. Then she felt the luxurious weight of the cashmere throw, saw Zoe wrapped like a burrito in a man's unmistakably expensive jacket. Her gaze found Kihyun in the chair. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Zoe, his expression in the low light unreadable but devoid of its usual sharp edges. It was a profile of contemplation, of protection. "Mr. Kim," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "I'm so sorry." The call ran long and she just crashed. "It is past midnight," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble in the silence. He finally turned his head to look at her. "The security detail has been notified not to disturb this floor. You will both remain here until morning. It is the safest logistical option." He stood, his movements smooth, not wanting to startle them. "There are spare toiletries in the executive washroom. I have disabled the alarm on the south elevator. It will take you directly to the garage level at 7 a.m. A car will be waiting." Amara sat up, pulling the cashmere throw around her. "Thank you," she said, the words imbued with a depth that went beyond the practicalities. She understood what she was seeing. The fortress had opened a gate, not with fanfare but with a blanket and a borrowed jacket. He gave a single nod. As he passed the love seat, his hand hovered for a moment over Zoe's head, a ghost of a gesture. He didn't make contact. He simply let it hover, as if feeling the warmth of her sleep, before withdrawing his hand and slipping silently out of the lounge. Back in his office, the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of their peaceful breathing, the phantom weight of the cashmere in his hands, the image of two people sleeping safely under his watch. The ice, he realized, wasn't just cracking. A deep, foundational permafrost was beginning to thaw, warmed by a quiet, unexpected vigil in the dark. The late-night work sessions became a new, unspoken norm. It was never discussed, just as the blanket and the jacket had never been discussed. It was a pattern that emerged from the chaos of the picnic, a silent agreement written in shared glances and the quiet hum of the tower after hours. Kihyun would find a reason to stay, a complex acquisition report, a patent deep dive. Amara would seamlessly integrate her own tasks, and Zoe would appear, already in her pajamas, a small backpack of quiet activities in tow. The lounge became a makeshift nursery, and Kihyun's office, with its door left open, became the quiet heart of their strange, new ecosystem. Tonight, a monumental storm lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city into a blurred watercolor of light and shadow. The usual quiet was replaced by the drumming of rain and the occasional low groan of the wind. Inside, the atmosphere was one of insulated calm. Zoe was asleep on the lounge sofa, wrapped in Kihyun's jacket, a stack of building blocks quiet at last. Amara was finishing a vendor compliance report at her desk outside his office, and Kihyun was ostensibly reviewing security protocols for the Singapore launch. He stood at the window, watching a river of rain cascade down the glass. The storm outside mirrored a peculiar turbulence within him. The data wasn't holding his focus. He turned and saw Amara through the open door, bathed in the soft glow of her desk lamp, her brow furrowed in concentration. The question surfaced not as a strategic inquiry, but as a genuine human need to know. He was a teacher, correct? Kihyun's voice cut through the rain static, softer than usual. Amara's pen stilled. She didn't need to ask who he was. She looked up, meeting his gaze across the dim space. The usual professional mask was softened by the late hour and the intimacy of the storm. High school history, she confirmed, a faint, wistful smile touching her lips. He loved making the past feel alive, like a story everyone had forgotten they were a part of. Kihyun moved to lean against his doorframe, a silhouette against the brighter light of his office. A narrative-based profession. The opposite of Dada. He said Dada was just a story waiting for context, she said, her voice fond. She swiveled her chair slightly to face him, drawing her knees up. He was sunlight. Steady, warm, predictable. He made the world feel safe and simple. The past tense hung between them, a shared acknowledgement of the void. His passing was sudden? Kihyun asked. The question was clinical, but his tone was not. It was a space he was offering, not intruding upon. Amara nodded, looking down at her hands. Aortic aneurysm. They're 1 minute, gone the next. No drama, no long illness. Just a light switching off. She took a shaky breath. I was 4 months pregnant. The grief and the hope were so tangled together, I thought they would tear me apart. Zoe, she was the reason I had to keep building the world even though it had collapsed. Kihyun absorbed this. He understood collapsed worlds. He understood rebuilding from rubble. But his rubble had been emotional abandonment, not a sudden, catastrophic loss of love. He found her strength, born of necessity and maternal ferocity, to be of a different, more formidable order than his own. You rebuilt efficiently, he stated, the highest praise he knew how to give. She gave a small, humorless laugh. I built a bunker. Schedules, budgets, contingency plans. Love inside but high walls. No unexpected variables. Her eyes met his again, a flash of rueful honesty. Until recently. The unspoken word, you, hung in the air. He was the ultimate unexpected variable. Silence settled, filled only by the rain. It was his turn. The reciprocity was not a transaction, but a compulsion. If she had shown him a piece of her wreckage, he would show her the foundation of his ice. I have no such narrative, he began, his voice detached as if reporting from a great distance. My parents are a statistical probability. A car accident when I was 5. The Korean foster system is a network, not a family. It is designed for survival, not connection. Love was an inefficient allocation of resources that inevitably led to system failure. He pushed off the doorframe and walked to the window again, his back to her. I learned to optimize for independence. Every relationship was a potential vulnerability, a point of failure. This, he gestured vaguely at the room, the tower, his entire empire, was built to be impregnable. To prove that needing no one was not a weakness, but the ultimate strength. Amara listened, her heart aching for the small boy in his story. She saw it now, the architecture of his solitude. It wasn't arrogance. It was a fortress meticulously constructed by a child who had been left too exposed. And is it, she asked softly, the ultimate strength? Kihyun was silent for a long moment, watching the storm. He thought of the weight of a sleeping child, the quiet peace of a shared vigil, the terrifying non-transactional urge to provide a blanket. The data, he said slowly, is becoming inconclusive. It was the closest to an admission of doubt he could muster. A seismic confession. Amara stood and walked to the lounge doorway, checking on Zoe. When she returned, she stood nearer to him, both of them looking out at the storm-washed city. My husband's favorite lesson to teach was about the Great Frost of 1709, she said. He said it was so cold, the wine froze in the glasses in the Palace of Versailles, and birds fell dead from the sky. But after that terrible frost, the growing season that followed was one of the most abundant in European history. The freeze had killed off the pests, deepened the roots. She glanced at his profile, sharp against the window. Sometimes a deep freeze isn't the end of the story. It's just a brutal, necessary season before the growth. Kihyun turned his head to look at her. In the reflection of the rain-streaked glass, their eyes met, hers full of a empathy that didn't pity, his full of a turmoil that was no longer cold. Here, in the dark, with the storm as their witness, they had exchanged not just histories, but the keys to their respective fortresses. I should get her home, Amara whispered, though the storm still raged. The car is downstairs, he said, his voice equally low. I will drive you. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of a new protocol, protection beyond the office walls. He collected his jacket from around Zoe, lifting the sleeping girl gently into his arms, the movement now less awkward, more assured. Amara gathered their things. They rode down in the elevator in a silence that was no longer empty, but thick with shared understanding. In the car's dark back seat, with Zoe between them, Amara finally spoke. Thank you, Kihyun. It was the first time she had used his given name. He didn't correct her. He simply looked from her face to the child resting against him, and gave a single, slow nod. The storm outside was beginning to wane. The deep freeze he suspected was thawing from the inside out, and the roots of something he couldn't yet name were digging in, deep and irrevocable. The fragile peace that had descended after the stormy night of confidences lasted precisely 11 days. It was shattered not by a personal misstep, but by the cold, mechanized world Kihyun understood all too well, the corporate battlefield. It began as a low hum, a dissonant frequency in the otherwise positive media coverage of Nexus Corp's latest innovation. A business blog known for its speculative gossip ran a piece titled, Nexus Corp's Heart, PR Stunt or Pandora's Box? It featured a grainy long-lens photo from the company picnic of Kihyun holding Zoe after her fall, his face an unreadable mask, Amara hovering nearby with a look of concern. The article was masterfully insidious. It mentioned Amara's tragic past as a young widow, detailed Kihyun's notorious emotional isolation, and posed questions about whether the CEO was exploiting a vulnerable employee's family for a warmer public image. It stopped just short of libel, weaving doubt like poison thread. Kihyun read it in his office at 5:17 a.m., his face a placid lake. The storm was internal now, a hurricane of cold fury. He knew the source without a trace. Alaric Vance of Vance Technologies, a rival who had lost the Singapore contract, a man whose ambition was only matched by his spite. This was a precision strike, aimed at the one vulnerability Kihyun hadn't known he possessed. By 9 a.m., the board's anxiety had metastasized into panic. The emergency meeting was a chorus of nervous ties being adjusted and the scent of stale coffee. The stock is down 3 points in pre-market trading, Kihyun, snapped Gerald Ross, the most conservative of the directors. Perception is reality. This sentimental narrative is backfiring. It's a distraction from our core messaging, added another. The Singapore launch is in 2 weeks. We need clean, focused leadership. Kihyun sat at the head of the table, his fingers steepled. He let them talk, let their fear fill the room. He was analyzing the attack vectors, the endpoints, the desired outcome. Vance wanted him to jettison the distraction. To prove he was still the Iceman, willing to sacrifice anything for the bottom line. Ross leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial register. The simplest solution is a clean break. The Jones woman is competent. We can offer her a generous severance and a stellar recommendation. She relocates, the story dies, and we issue a statement about respecting employee privacy. The narrative resets. The Jones woman. A clean break. The words were sterile, surgical. They were also the logical move. The move the old Kihyun, the pre-Zoe, pre-blanket, pre-confessional storm Kihyun, would have made without a flicker of hesitation. It was the optimal play to stabilize the variable. But as the board members looked at him, waiting for his cool agreement, they saw not calculation, but a slow-burning fire in his dark eyes. The ice was gone, melted by a fury they had never witnessed. You are suggesting, Kihyun said, his voice deceptively quiet, a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath, that I terminate a valued, irreplaceable employee and uproot a child because Alaric Vance is a poor loser who peddles in gutter journalism. Ross blinked. I'm suggesting we protect Nexus Corp. You are suggesting I sacrifice 2 innocent people to appease a bully. Kihyun stood, his presence suddenly dominating the room. You are suggesting I validate the very narrative you fear, that this company and I are heartless. That our family values branding is a hollow shell. He placed his palms flat on the table. Amara Jones has increased departmental efficiency by 18% since her arrival. Her daughter is not a narrative. She is a child who has done nothing but exist. Vance's strategy relies on my predictable, emotionless response. He is betting on the man I was. He looked at each board member, his gaze unwavering. That man would have already had the termination papers drawn up. That man is no longer in charge. A stunned silence followed. Gerald Ross recovered first, sputtering. Be that as it may, the practical reality. The practical reality, Kihyun interrupted, his voice final, is that I will be addressing the media today at 3 p.m. You're welcome to watch. The strategy is no longer damage control. It is redefinition. He walked out, leaving a room thick with shock. He didn't go to his office. He went to Amara's workstation. She was already there, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She had seen the article. She was waiting for the axe to fall, her posture that of someone already braced for impact, her protective walls slamming back into place. Amara, he said, her name firm on his lips. She looked up, a flinch of shame and defiance in her eyes. I've started backing up my files. I understand the position this has put you in. Stop, he commanded, but the edge was gone. He crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, an intimacy for the middle of the open office. Listen to me. This is an attack from Vance. It is a business move. It has nothing to do with you or Zoe. Do you understand? Tears welled in her eyes, born of stress and a dawning, terrifying hope. The board? The board advises. I decide. He took a deep breath, the most vulnerable he had ever been in this bright public space. I need to know if you trust me. She searched his face, the man who had held her crying daughter, who had shared his barren past in the dark. She saw the fury there, but it was not directed at her. It was a fortress wall, now facing outward to protect what was inside. Yes, she whispered. He nodded once, a pact sealed. Then be in the front row at 3 p.m. He stood and walked away, not to hide but to prepare for war. The old Kihyun would have protected his empire by retreating, by shedding weakness. The new Kihyun, the one thawed by strawberry shampoo and quiet confidences, would protect his people by advancing. By declaring, for the first time in his life, that some things were more valuable than stock points. The ice had not just melted, it had become the flood that would sweep away the threats to his newfound shore. The Nexus Core Auditorium was a study in controlled tension. At 2:58 p.m. it was packed, a sea of expectant faces from the financial press, tech journalists, and a smattering of curious employees who had managed to find a seat. The air buzzed with low speculation. They were here for a corporate retraction, a masterclass in damage control from the famously unflappable Kihyun Kim. They expected ice. They expected a strategic retreat. Backstage, Kihyun stood motionless, looking at the prepared statement on a tablet. His PR director, a woman named Elena with nerves of steel, had crafted a perfect piece of legal poetry. It expressed regret for the invasion of privacy, reaffirmed Nexus Core's commitment to family values as a corporate ethos, and distanced the CEO's personal conduct from the company's professional mission. It was clean, safe, and would have made Gerald Ross breathe a sigh of relief. Kihyun swiped the document away, leaving the screen dark. He thought of a small hand in his, of a blanket draped over sleeping shoulders, of a voice in the dark sharing a story about a deep frost and the growth that follows. He thought of Amara's face that morning, pale but trusting. He thought of the word Dada, not as a contaminant but as a key. We're ready for you, Mr. Kim, Elena said, her earpiece glowing. He nodded, straightening the cuffs of his jacket, a different one than Zoe had used as a blanket. He walked onto the stage, the lights hot and blinding, the murmur dying instantly. He stood at the podium, his gaze sweeping the crowd, finding Amara in the front row as promised. She sat straight-backed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, Zoe mercifully with a trusted friend. Her eyes were wide, offering a silent anchor. He did not smile. He did not offer pleasantries. Thank you for coming, he began, his voice cool and carrying, amplified in the hush. You are here because of a story. A story that posits a calculation, that the humanity of a company can be a weakness to be exploited. That compassion is a liability. He paused, letting the words hang. I am here to tell a different story. He stepped out from behind the podium, a small but significant break from protocol. The article in question mentions my assistant, Amara Jones. It references her family. It uses these facts to imply a transaction, a cold exchange of image for personal tragedy. His eyes found hers again, holding them. Amara Jones is the most capable, ethical, and indispensable person at Nexus Core. Her personal strength is not a commodity. It is an asset this company is privileged to have. To suggest otherwise is not just inaccurate, it is an insult to her and to the integrity of this entire organization. A ripple went through the crowd. This was not the script. This was personal. The article also mentions a child, he continued, his voice losing a fraction of its steely edge, gaining a new, gravelly timbre. Her name is Zoe. She is 3 years old. She likes yogurt bites and building towers that fall down. She is also, for reasons that still escape my understanding, unafraid of me. A faint, almost imperceptible shadow of a smile touched his lips, gone in a heartbeat. It was more humanizing than any broad grin could have been. When a story like this is published, the expected corporate response is to create distance, to lawyer up, to hide. He shook his head once, a sharp, definitive motion. I will not hide a child to protect a stock price. I will not ask a remarkable woman to make herself smaller to make my life more convenient. My failure was not in allowing them into the public eye. My failure was ever believing that protecting them was a business strategy. He paused, the silence so complete one could hear the whir of a camera lens focusing. Amara's hands had come up to cover her mouth, her eyes shimmering. "It is not a strategy," Kihyun said, his voice dropping, becoming more intimate, yet somehow filling the room. "It is a human imperative. And today, Nexus Core will formalize that imperative." He turned slightly, indicating the large screen behind him. It flickered to life, not with financial graphs, but with a simple, elegant logo. A small, sturdy tree growing within the outline of a circuit board. Beneath it were the words, "The Zoe Initiative." "Effective immediately," Kihyun announced, his voice regaining its CEO resonance, now infused with a palpable, driven passion. "Nexus Core will establish a fund and a company-wide policy dedicated to supporting single parents and guardians within our workforce. This will include subsidized, on-site emergency childcare, flexible remote work protocols, and extended parental leave. We will not just brandish the word family. We will build the architecture to support it." The auditorium erupted. Not in scandal, but in a wave of stunned applause and the frantic clicking of cameras. He had taken the attempt to paint him as exploitative, and had inverted it completely. He hadn't defended, he had championed. He hadn't created distance. He had moved them to the very center of the company's future mission. He held up a hand for quiet. "We build networks, infrastructure, systems of support. That is what we do. Today we choose to apply that expertise to the most important network there is, the one that holds our families together. That is the Nexus Core I lead. That is the story I choose to tell. Thank you." He did not take questions. He gave a single brief nod and walked off the stage, leaving a roar of conversation in his wake. He moved through the backstage area like a man in a dream, past a stunned but grinning Elena, past startled staff. He found Amara just off the side entrance. She was alone, tears streaming freely down her cheeks now, not of fear, but of an overwhelming, cathartic release. She looked at him, this man who had just publicly tied his company's legacy to her daughter's name, who had called her indispensable, who had redefined his entire leadership to protect them. Words failed her. She simply stepped forward and closed the distance between them. She wrapped her arms around him in a tight, fierce, grateful hug. It was different from Zoe's cling, different from the brief, necessary hold at the picnic. This was an embrace between two adults, two survivors, two people whose fortified walls had been breached by the same tiny, miraculous force. It was full of shock, relief, awe, and a dawning, terrifying possibility. Her face was buried in his shoulder, her body trembling slightly. Kihyun stiffened for only a second, a lifetime of instinct screaming against the vulnerability. Then, with a shuddering exhale, his arms came up and around her. He held her tightly, his chin resting gently on the crown of her head. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had just been violently recalibrated. In that embrace, the last of the ice in his core melted away, not in a slow thaw, but in a great, liberating rush. He was not just protecting them. He was with them. And he was home. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their eyes holding a universe of unspoken understanding. Around them, the world was buzzing with the news of the Zoe Initiative. But in that quiet corner, there was only the echo of a vow made not to a board or a press corps, but to a woman and a child. A vow, for the first time, written not in data, but in the unwavering language of the heart. The week following the press conference was a paradox. Publicly, Nexus Core was riding a wave of unprecedented positive press. The Zoe Initiative was hailed as a landmark in corporate responsibility, and Kihyun was recast from an icy genius into a visionary, empathetic leader. Privately, the two people at the center of the storm existed in a state of tender, bewildering limbo. The unspoken rules that had governed their world had dissolved. The lines between boss and assistant, between transaction and truth, had blurred into obscurity. What remained was a raw, new space, and neither Kihyun nor Amara had a map for it. It began with small, seismic shifts. Kihyun no longer scheduled late-night work sessions. Instead, he would finish his day and appear at the threshold of Amara's workstation at a reasonable hour. "Is there a pressing need to stay?" he would ask, his tone neutral, but his eyes holding a question that went deeper. The first time Amara, flustered, had stammered about finishing a report. He had simply nodded and said, "It can authenticate tomorrow. Zoe's bedtime is 7:30 p.m. He had remembered. The act of leaving together became a new ritual. Then came the evening at Amara's apartment. It was a Thursday. A minor crisis with a European server farm had kept them both late, and Zoe was already home with the sitter, restless. Kihyun had driven them, and at the curb, Amara, exhausted and strangely unwilling for the connection to sever, heard herself say, "Would you like to come up? For dinner?" It's just pasta. He had looked at her building, then at her, a flicker of something like panic in his eyes. Entering her personal domain was a frontier far beyond the office lounge. I do not wish to be an inconvenience, he said formally. You're not, she said, and the simplicity of it seemed to decide him. Her apartment was a warm, lived-in contrast to his sterile penthouse. Books were piled on side tables, Zoe's artwork was taped to the refrigerator, and a well-loved sofa was draped with a colorful afghan. Zoe, upon seeing him, shrieked with delight and launched herself at his legs in a now familiar greeting. Kihyun here. He stood in the middle of the living room, looking so out of place in his bespoke suit amidst the cozy chaos that Amara had to bite back a laugh. Make yourself at home, she said, heading to the kitchen. I'll just be a minute. He did not know how to make himself at home. He carefully removed his jacket and draped it over the back of a chair. He then sat on the very edge of the sofa, back straight. Zoe immediately climbed up beside him and presented him with a battered picture book about a lost duck. Read? Kihyun took the book as if it were made of glass. He opened it and began to read in his CO baritone, flat and devoid of inflection. Duck was lost for his pond. Zoe giggled, snuggling against his rigid arm. Silly. Like this. She then launched into a bubbly, dramatic narration, complete with quacking sounds. Kihyun watched her, then looked down at the book. He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. He attempted a quack. It was stiff, absurdly formal, but it was an attempt. Zoe's peals of laughter were his reward, and a slow, genuine smile, one that reached his eyes, spread across his face. Amara watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart performing a slow, dizzying somersault in her chest. Dinner was a clumsy, beautiful affair. He awkwardly helped set the table. He asked Zoe about her day at daycare, listening to her jumbled stories with a focus he usually reserved for board meetings. The hugs began here in this domestic space. When Zoe knocked over her cup of milk, Amara moved to clean it, but Kihyun was there first, dabbing at the spill with a napkin. Frustrated, Zoe cried, and he instinctively gathered her into his arms for a brief, comforting squeeze. The cup was in non-optimal placement, he consoled her, which made Amara laugh. Later, as Amara burned her finger on a pot, he was beside her in an instant, taking her hand to guide it under the cool tap, his other hand a steadying pressure on her back, a fleeting, protective embrace that left her skin tingling. The most telling test was the following weekend, when Amara's parents came to the city. She mentioned it offhandedly, and Kihyun, after a long pause, asked, "Do they require an assessment of my intentions?" Amara blinked. What? No. They're just visiting. It is a logical inquiry. I am a prominent figure now connected to their daughter and granddaughter. I should meet them. To provide context. He said it like a man preparing for a hostile takeover bid. And so, he found himself in a bustling family-style restaurant, across from Bob and Irene Jones, two retired teachers from Atlanta who observed him with warm, intelligent curiosity. Kihyun was painfully formal, answering questions about his work with succinct precision. The turning point came when Irene asked gently, "And what do you do for fun, Kihyun?" He stared, utterly stumped. Fun was not a metric he tracked. Zoe, sitting in a high chair beside him, saved him by banging her spoon and declaring, "He reads duck books. Bad quacks." The table erupted in laughter, and Kihyun, instead of being embarrassed, felt the strange, warm glow of inclusion. He looked at Amara, who was laughing with tears in her eyes, and then at her parents, who were looking at him not with judgment, but with a dawning, hopeful understanding. He was being evaluated not as a billionaire but as a man. And he realized with a jolt that he wanted to pass. After dessert, as they said goodbye in the parking lot, Bob Jones shook his hand firmly. "You take care of our girls, you hear?" It wasn't a threat. It was a quiet benediction, an offering of trust. On the drive back to Amara's apartment, the silence was comfortable. "They approved," Kihyun stated as if confirming a data point. Amara smiled, looking out the window. "They did. But more importantly, you came. You didn't have to." "Yes," he said softly, pulling up to her curb. "I did." He walked them to the door. Zoe, asleep on his shoulder, was transferred gently to Amara. They stood in the pool of the porch light, the air humming with all that was unsaid. The public vow had been easy compared to this private navigation. The hug they shared then was different again. Longer, a slow, full embrace that spoke of shared hurdles cleared, of a future tentatively, bravely being explored. It was a promise held in the quiet dark, a silent acknowledgement that they were no longer boss and assistant, nor merely co-conspirators in a PR strategy. They were Kihyun and Amara, standing on the precipice of something real, teaching each other, one awkward quack and one quiet embrace at a time, how to belong to someone again. The new rhythm of their lives was a melody Kihyun had never dared imagine, and its sweetness was precisely what began to terrify him. The domestic evenings, the shared laughter, the way Zoe's small hand had become a familiar, sought-after weight in his, it was building into a symphony of belonging that threatened to drown out the solitary, survivalist drumbeat that had guided his entire life. Love, he was discovering, was not a quiet hum in the background. It was a deafening, glorious noise, and it made the silent void of his past seem all the more profound and perilous. The fear arrived not with a bang, but as a slow, insidious frost creeping back into his veins. It whispered to him during a board meeting as he watched Amara deftly handle a logistics nightmare. She is brilliant. She could lead anywhere. She is only here because of a child's mistake and your misguided charity. It hissed at him in the night, in his empty penthouse that felt emptier now because he knew what warmth felt like. You are a man built on absence. You will fail them. You will become the emptiness you've always known. He began to sabotage it. Not consciously, not with malice, but with the desperate, clumsy instincts of a wounded animal retreating to its barren, familiar den. He became hypercritical of minor report discrepancies where he would have previously offered guidance. He reinstated a wall of formality, calling her Ms. Jones in meetings, his tone reverting to its old, glacial neutrality. He cancelled 2 weekend outings with vague, allusions to critical strategic recalibrations. Amara felt the shift like a change in barometric pressure. The warmth in his eyes, so hard-won, was being replaced by a haunted distance. She tried to bridge it, asking if he was okay if the stress of the initiative was too much. He would dismiss her concerns with a curt, "Efficiency is merely being re-optimized." The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Zoe had drawn a picture at daycare. A stick figure with a big smile, holding hands with a smaller stick figure and a tall, lanky one with a triangle for a tie. At the bottom, in the teacher's handwriting, it said, "My family, Mama, Zoe, Kihyun." Zoe had presented it to him with such pride, pressing it into his hands before skipping off to play. Kihyun stared at the paper. The word family was a grenade pin in his hand. The simple, joyful illustration was a blueprint for a castle he was certain he would reduce to rubble. His own damaged foundation would not hold the weight of their love. He would become the variable that ruined their equation. That afternoon he called Amara into his office. He did not look at her. He looked at the Singapore skyline proposal on his desk, a project that would require a senior on-site liaison for 6 months. "Ms. Jones," he began, his voice stripped of all emotion, a sterile instrument. "Your performance has been exceptional. It has become clear that your talents are being underutilized in your current support role." Amara's blood ran cold. She knew this tone. It was the prelude to an execution. He slid a folder across the desk. Nexus Corps is establishing a permanent satellite operations hub in Singapore. The lead liaison position requires your exact skill set. It represents a significant promotion, a 40% salary increase and full relocation support. He finally met her eyes, and his were the color of a winter sea. "It is the optimal next step for your career. I am offering it to you." The room spun. Singapore. The other side of the planet. He was offering her a golden cage, a beautiful, luxurious escape from him. This was his solution. To pay them to leave. To complete the transaction he had always pretended this was. "You're sending us away?" Her voice was a broken whisper. "I am providing an unparalleled opportunity," he corrected, every word a shard of ice. "For you and for Zoe. A fresh start. Security. Far from the oi complications here." "Complications," she repeated, the word tasting like ash. The hugs, the confidences, the duck books, the way he defended them to the world, all reduced to a complication, to be optimized away. A fiery, wounded strength surged through her, burning away the shock. She did not cry. She stood taller, her eyes blazing as she looked at the man who had thawed only to refreeze himself. "You don't get to decide what's good for us out of fear," she said, her voice low and vibrating with intensity. "You think you're being noble? You're being a coward. You're so terrified of failing us that you're failing us right now by pushing us out." He flinched as if struck, but his mask held. "This is a strategic decision for your benefit." "No," she fired back, stepping closer to the desk. "This is you running. You think love is a vulnerability because the only models you had for it ended in loss. So you'd rather orchestrate the loss yourself on your own terms so you can control the narrative. Just like you always do. She gestured to the Singapore folder. That's not a promotion. It's a severance package for your heart. Kihyun was silent, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered. We choose you, Kihyun, Amara said, her voice cracking now with emotion. Zoe chooses you. I choose you. But you have to choose us back. Not because it's strategic, not because it's part of some deal, but because it's real. And if you can't do that, then this, she waved a hand between them encompassing everything, was just the most expensive, heartbreaking PR stunt in history. She looked at him, waiting for a sign for the ice to break. He remained immobile, a statue of conflicted agony. The silence was absolute, and in it, Amara heard her answer. With a slow, sad nod, she turned and walked out of his office. She didn't slam the door. She closed it with a soft, final click, the sound more devastating than any fury. Alone, Kihyun stared at the closed door. He looked down at Zoe's drawing still on his desk. The smiling stick figure mocked him. The fear screamed that he had just saved them from the inevitable collapse he would bring. But as he traced the crayon line of Zoe's stick figure hand in his, a new sensation, far more terrifying than fear, burst through the permafrost. A devastating, absolute certainty of loss. He had not protected them. He had just made the deepest, most catastrophic error of his life. And the crushing weight of the silence that now filled his fortress was the price. The week that followed was an exercise in exquisite desolation. Kihyun's world, once a model of predictable order, had been reduced to a series of hollow echoes. He arrived at the office at 5:17 a.m. to a silence that felt accusatory. Amara's workstation was immaculate, but it was the emptiness of it that screamed. No soft light from her desk lamp in the evening, no gentle murmur on a call, no scent of her chamomile tea. He had mandated her to work remotely while she considered the Singapore opportunity, a coward's compromise that only amplified the void. He performed his duties with robotic precision, but the soul of Nexus Core had vanished. The Zoe Initiative plans sat on his desk, their bold graphics now a taunting reminder of the heart he had publicly championed and privately rejected. Gerald Ross commended his clear-headed leadership in making a tough personnel decision. The praise tasted like poison. The crisis point came on Friday. He found himself, not in his office reviewing quarterly reports, but standing outside the gates of Little Sprouts Haven. He watched from a distance, a specter in a tailored coat, as children spilled out into the playground for afternoon recess. His eyes scanned the small, bundled figures until he found her, a pink puffer jacket, a striped hat, chasing a bubble with determined glee. His feet moved of their own volition. He spoke to the director, his CEO authority granting him immediate, if puzzled, access. He found Zoe in a corner of the art room, her tongue peeking out in concentration as she worked on a new drawing. She looked up as his shadow fell over the table. Her face, which usually lit up like a sunrise at the sight of him, underwent a confusing journey. Joy flickered, then dimmed into uncertainty, then settled into a quiet, sad observation. Kihyun, she said, not a shout but a statement. Hello Zoe, he said, his voice strangely thick. He knelt, bringing himself to her level, the gravel of the playground biting into his expensive trousers. What are you drawing? She looked down at her paper. It was the same theme, 3 figures. But this time they were not holding hands. The tall figure with the triangle tie was on the opposite side of the page, a blue scribble separating them. Mama says you're going far away on an airplane, she mumbled, not looking at him. That we might go on an airplane too. The raw, unvarnished translation of his actions was a knife to his chest. He had not just offered a promotion. He had drawn a blue scribble of separation across their world. Do you want to go on an airplane, Zoe? He asked, the most important question of his life. She finally looked at him, her big brown eyes swimming with confusion. I want to read duck books. I want you to have pasta. I want you to be my appa. The last word was a whisper, a secret wish she'd been clutching tightly, now revealed with a tremble. It shattered him. The last fortress wall, the one built around the core of his own unworthiness, crumbled into dust. This child, with her yogurt bites and unconditional love, had seen through every defense, every calculation, and had chosen him. And he had tried to pay her to go away. He reached out a hand not to take her drawing, but to cover her small, crayon-holding fist with his own. Zoe, he said, his voice rough with an emotion so vast it had no name. I have made a very bad mistake. The worst one. He didn't have the words, the grand speech. He had only truth. I was scared. But I am not scared anymore. Because being without you and your mama is the scariest thing I can imagine. He took a shuddering breath. Would it be okay if I tried to be your appa? If I stayed? Zoe studied his face, her child's intuition reading the agony and the hope there. Slowly, a tiny tentative smile broke through. She nodded, a single solemn dip of her chin. Then she launched herself from her chair and into his arms. He caught her, holding her close, burying his face in the soft wool of her hat. This hug was an absolution, a homecoming to a place he'd never known he belonged. He held her until he could breathe again, until the frozen sea inside him had fully melted into a river of resolve. He knew what he had to do. He arrived at Amara's apartment building as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and gold. He carried no briefcase, no contract, no folder of relocation benefits. In his pocket was a single heavy item, the key to his penthouse. He rang the bell. When Amara opened the door, she looked tired, beautiful, and guarded. She said nothing, simply stepped back to let him in. "I went to see Zoe," he began, not moving from the doorway. Amara's eyes widened, a flash of protective fear in them. Why? To ask her the most important question. He took a step forward, his gaze locking with hers. "I asked if I could be her appa." The air left Amara's lungs in a rush. She brought a hand to her mouth. "She said yes," Kihyun whispered, the words filled with awe. "But her answer is not enough. Not without yours." He closed the distance between them but did not touch her. He was offering, not taking. "Amara, I have spent a lifetime building fortresses. You and Zoe, you didn't breach the walls. You made me realize there was nothing worth protecting inside them. You gave me something to protect." His voice grew stronger, fueled by a conviction that now felt as innate as breathing. "I am not offering you a promotion or a deal or a strategy. I am offering you myself. Flawed, terrified, and desperately in love with you. I am offering you my home not as a place to live, but as a place to build a family. Together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the polished steel key. He did not kneel in a gesture of proposal, but held it out on his palm, a symbol of total, vulnerable surrender. "This is yours. The door is open. Whether you choose to walk through it with me, that is your decision. But I am choosing you. Today, tomorrow, forever. I am all in." Tears streamed down Amara's cheeks, but they were tears of release, of a long-held breath finally exhaled. She looked from the key in his hand to the raw, open hope in his eyes. She saw the man who had defended her, comforted her child, learned to quack, and had finally, bravely, chosen to feel everything he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. She did not take the key. Instead, she placed her hand over his, closing his fingers around it. Then she cupped his face in her hands. "We don't need your penthouse," she said softly. "We just need you." And she kissed him. It was not a hesitant kiss. It was a seal, a promise, a confluence of all the longing, frustration, and overwhelming love that had built between them. It was the first kiss and it tasted of forever. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, the world had irrevocably realigned. Later, as they sat on her well-loved sofa, Zoe asleep between them, Kihyun finally felt it, the deep, resonant peace of a man who is no longer lost. He had come in from the cold, and the warmth he found was not a temporary shelter, but his eternal home. He held his family, his bold, brilliant Amara, his sunshine Zoe, and knew with every fiber of his once frozen heart that this was the only empire he ever needed to build.